My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 29, and I've just moved to a small town called Eldridge, hoping for a fresh start. I inherited an old house from my aunt, and I thought it'd be a good idea to list it on Airbnb for some extra cash. The house was charming, old, with creaky floors and a lot of character. I didn't expect it to become the setting for my worst nightmare. Leo was my first guest. He booked the place for a weekend. I didn't think much of him when I saw his profile. Vague references, a few good reviews, and a picture of him smiling. His smile bothered me though. It was too wide, like he was trying too hard. But I ignored it. I was new to hosting, and I needed the money. When Leo arrived, something felt off. He was tall, maybe in his mid-40s, with a calm, unsettling way of talking. He didn't bring much luggage, just a small backpack, which I found odd for someone staying for the weekend. He gave me that same wide smile when I handed him the keys, and I forced myself to smile back. The first night, I stayed at a friend's house nearby, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Around midnight, I got a notification from the security camera I'd set up in the living room. I opened the app, expecting to see nothing, but there was Leo standing in the middle of the room, staring at the camera. He didn't move for a long time. Then he smiled again, just like in his profile picture. My stomach dropped. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just weird, or maybe he didn't realize I was watching. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I went back to the house to check on things. Leo was out, but the place felt different. Items were out of place. My kitchen knives had been moved. My books were scattered, and one of the chairs was pulled away from the dining table. I found a small spot of blood on the floor near the basement door. It wasn't big, just a smudge, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises, creaking, whispering, and a strange tapping sound. I thought it was just the house settling, but it was too rhythmic to be random. I got up and checked every room, but everything seemed fine. Still, the unease gnawed at me. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard a loud bang from the basement. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and headed downstairs. The air felt colder as I descended the stairs, and the smell of damp wood filled the basement. I shone the light around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary until I saw it. A trapdoor in the corner, hidden under an old rug. I'd never seen it before, but it looked ancient with rusted metal hinges. My hands were shaking as I pulled it open. The smell that hit me was unbearable, like something rotting. I climbed down the ladder, my flashlight flickering, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The room was small, with stone walls, but the thing that stood out were the photos. Dozens of them, taped to the walls, showing different people. Some of them looked familiar, like they were from the town. But others, I recognized from Leo's reviews on Airbnb. They were all people who had stayed at this house before, and some of them had been reported missing. I backed away, horrified, but as I turned to leave, Leo was standing there, blocking my way out. His smile was gone now, replaced with a cold, predatory stare. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said quietly, his voice low and menacing. Panic took over. I grabbed the nearest object, a broken piece of wood, and swung it at him. He stumbled back, giving me just enough time to climb the ladder. I slammed the trapdoor shut and ran upstairs, locking the basement door behind me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. I called the police, barely able to speak through the terror. They arrived within minutes, and when they opened the trapdoor, Leo was gone. They found the photographs, though, and they said they were launching an investigation. But Leo had vanished without a trace. Now, I don't feel safe in this house anymore. I'm planning to sell it and move far away from Eldridge. I can't walk through the hallways without feeling like someone is watching me. I don't hear the strange tapping sounds anymore, but the silence is even worse. It's like the house is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Every night, I lie awake, wondering if Leo is out there, waiting for his next victim. And I can't help but think that maybe I was never meant to survive. Maybe I was just lucky this time. But what if Leo comes back? What if someone else isn't as lucky as I was? This house, it holds secrets. Dark ones. I thought listing it on Airbnb was a good way to make extra money, but it's only brought me closer to a nightmare I can't wake up from. Now, I know the truth. There's something lurking in the shadows of Eldridge, and I was just another target. Story 2. My name is Ethan Harris. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Chicago. I've always loved the outdoors, so when I found a rustic cabin for rent on Airbnb up in the mountains, I couldn't resist. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, just me, the trees, and a lot of hiking. But that's not how it turned out. The cabin was remote, tucked away in the woods, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. When I arrived, the place looked perfect. It was old but cozy, with a fireplace and big windows overlooking the forest. I unpacked and settled in, looking forward to some peace and quiet. But that first night, I realized something wasn't right. It started with noises, soft whispers, like someone talking far away. But when I listened harder, it stopped. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the wind or the house settling. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound that sent chills down my spine. Crying. It was faint but unmistakable. Someone was crying out in the woods. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and stood at the window, scanning the tree line. There was nothing. No movement, no sign of anyone. Still, the crying continued, and it was getting louder, more desperate. My heart raced, but I wasn't about to go out into the dark woods without knowing what I was dealing with. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to explore the cabin a little more, trying to distract myself. While moving the old furniture around, I accidentally knocked over a small floorboard. Underneath was something unexpected, an old leather-bound diary. Curiosity got the better of me, so I started reading. It belonged to a woman named Grace, a guest who had stayed at the cabin years ago. Her entries started normal, talking about the peaceful surroundings and how much she loved the solitude. But as I read on, her tone shifted. She began describing hearing the same things I had, whispers and cries at night. Grace wrote about a man who lived nearby, a recluse known in the area for being unpredictable, violent even. She mentioned seeing him in the woods, watching her from a distance, his eyes cold and empty. According to her, the man had a history of luring people deeper into the forest, and some of them never came back. As I read those words, my stomach dropped. The cries I heard last night, they couldn't be real, right? But now, I wasn't so sure. I felt like I was being watched, like someone, or something, was out there, waiting for me to make a mistake. Despite the warnings in the diary, I did the one thing I knew I shouldn't. I ignored my instincts and decided to explore the forest. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was stupidity, but something pulled me toward the woods. I walked deeper and deeper, the trees getting denser, the air colder. And then I found it. At first, it looked like just another abandoned cabin. But as I got closer, I realized this place wasn't just old, it was decaying, falling apart. The windows were broken, and the front door hung off its hinges. Inside, it was worse. The walls were covered in scratches, and the floor was littered with random belongings, clothes, shoes, even a few personal items like watches and wallets. But no people. That's when I knew. This was the man's place. And these were the remnants of the guests who never made it back. I turned to leave, but standing in the doorway was the man from Grace's diary. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and he had a knife in his hand. I froze, my mind racing. He said nothing, just stared at me with a sick grin, like he was enjoying the fear on my face. I had no choice but to run. I bolted past him, sprinting through the woods, branches scratching at my arms and legs. I could hear him chasing me, getting closer. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. I needed to lose him. That's when I remembered the cabin's old cellar. I ran back, slammed open the door, and raced down the stairs. The man followed, but as soon as he entered, I shoved the heavy door shut and locked it from the outside. His pounding on the door echoed through the cabin as I grabbed my phone and called the police. When they arrived, the man was still trapped inside. They took him away, and I made sure they knew about the diary, about Grace and the others. I was lucky to escape, but I knew not everyone had been. I left the cabin that day and never looked back. But I can still hear the whispers, and I'll never forget the cries for help that echoed through the woods. Ready to feel a chill run down your spine? Join us in the shadows and dive into the world of terrifying tales and creepy encounters. Subscribe now to Shivers in the Dark and hit the bell so you never miss a story that keeps you up at night. My name is Tara Bennett. I'm 27 and I live in Atlanta, Georgia. After a stressful month at work, I decided to take a weekend getaway. I found a charming apartment in a historic district through Eerie. The pictures were beautiful. Exposed brick walls, vintage furniture, and a view of the old town square. It was perfect, or at least I thought it would be. When I arrived, the place was just like the photos. Cozy, warm, and mysterious with its creaky floors and antique decorations. But one thing caught my eye almost immediately: a locked door in the hallway. I asked the host about it through the app, but he brushed it off, saying it was just storage and not to worry. His vague response left me curious, but I didn't press further. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the door. My curiosity was eating away at me. What could be inside? I had a bobby pin in my bag, and after a few attempts, I managed to pick the lock. The door opened with a creak, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, the air was stale, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with dolls. But not just any dolls. These were porcelain dolls, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their glassy eyes staring blankly ahead. My heart raced when I realized they weren't just random dolls. They looked like real people. I stepped closer, inspecting their faces. Each doll seemed to resemble someone unique, and the more I looked, the more unsettling it became. One doll, in particular, looked eerily similar to a man I'd seen in old photographs on the apartment walls. My stomach turned. These dolls looked like former tenants. I quickly shut the door, my mind racing, trying to shake off the unease. But that night, things took a darker turn. I couldn't sleep. Every time I drifted off, I heard faint laughter, children's laughter, but there were no kids around. I kept seeing the dolls in my dreams, their faces twisted into eerie smiles, their eyes following me. I tossed and turned, the room feeling more oppressive by the minute. By morning, I was exhausted. I needed to get out. As I prepared to pack my things, I noticed an old newspaper sitting on the kitchen counter. It wasn't there before. The headline grabbed my attention. Tenant mysteriously vanishes in historic district apartment. The article described the disappearance of a man who had lived in the apartment. The chilling part: his face looked just like one of the dolls I'd seen in that room. I felt sick. I had to leave, but before I could do anything, there was a knock at the door. It was a neighbor, an older woman, looking nervous. She whispered, telling me I needed to leave, that the owner had a history. Apparently, he had a violent temper, especially toward tenants who disturbed his doll collection. I felt cold dread creeping up my spine. The warning was clear. I wasn't safe here. Just as the neighbor left, the front door creaked open. The owner stepped in, his face twisted with rage. He was holding a knife, and his eyes were locked on mine. My heart pounded as I backed away, fear paralyzing me. I was cornered. In a blind panic, I grabbed one of the dolls from the shelf and threw it at him. The doll shattered against his chest, and he stumbled, startled just long enough for me to escape. I ran out of the apartment, not caring about my things. I just needed to get away. I didn't stop running until I reached a busy cafe down the street. Safe, but shaken, I called the police and told them everything. They said they'd look into it, but I didn't stick around to find out what they found. I never went back to that apartment. I didn't want to know what else was hidden behind that door, or what might have happened if I hadn't escaped. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that the dolls are still there, waiting for the next guest to disturb them.